Have you ever looked at the walls of your house and suddenly felt they weren't straight anymore? I'm not talking about an optical illusion. I'm talking about a real, sickening feeling that the room you're sitting in has started to tilt off its axis. I never believed in that haunted house crap. I'm a rational person, you know? I work in a software development. I live my life by logic and schedules. I moved to this rural house in Oak Creek, Wisconsin, just looking for total isolation to finish my last coding project. It was a classic wooden house, 5 miles away from the nearest neighbor. By the second week, I started noticing something strange. An old rusted gray Chevy Silverado would stop at the end of my long driveway every single night at 11 p.m. No lights, nobody gets out. It just sits there for an hour, then it leaves. I ignored it until the 8th night, when the truck started crawling toward the house, slowly, with no engine running. I froze. I watched this man in clean work clothes pull out a thin metal wire and drive it into the foundation of my house. He wasn't breaking in. He was adjusting the house. I felt the floor beneath my feet tilt just slightly. I ran for the door, but it was jammed, like the frame had warped from some calculated pressure from the outside. Then, I heard it. Light tapping sounds, like metal precision drilling into the wood. Then thin green laser lines started creeping through the walls, drawing a complex grid right over my body. This house wasn't just wood anymore. It was a structural system being surgically dismantled. The wooden beams started groaning, and the walls began to crack in perfect straight lines. I looked out the window. He was standing there, aiming laser lenses at the support columns. He looked at me with this cold, detached indifference. I was just a flaw in his equation, a sample that needed to be disposed of to finish the demolition. In that moment, I felt my home sinking into a silent pit he'd carved out beneath the foundation. A piece of the ceiling collapsed, rubble burying my desk while I crawled toward the only window that hadn't shattered yet, trying to get out before the roof finished crushing the air out of my lungs. I escaped the slanted wreckage and ran into the dark cornfields until I hit my car on the main road. I didn't even know where I was anymore. Rural Wisconsin roads all looked the same in the dark. I drove like a madman toward Highway 43, just wanting to hit civilization. But after 20 miles, the engine sputtered and died, right in the middle of a completely deserted stretch. I got out to check the hood, and the shock, it stopped my heart. There was no engine, just a small black box wired with delicate threads, exactly like the ones I saw on my walls. He'd messed with my car while I was busy with the collapse. Suddenly, the gray truck's lights appeared behind me. It didn't come fast, it just stopped at a distance, exactly like it did back at the house. Terror crept into my bones. He wasn't chasing me to kill me. He was chasing me to complete his experiment. I jumped out and ran into the nearby woods, listening to the echo of his footsteps behind me. They weren't rushing. They were rhythmic, steady, like a ticking clock. I reached an old, abandoned barn and ducked inside to hide. But the nightmare was inside, too. The barn was covered in photographs of me, pictures of me buying coffee, working at my desk, screaming in my ruined house. He was documenting every reaction, every scream, every moment of fear. I felt a cold touch on my neck. I spun around. He was standing there in his clean work clothes, holding a small laser measuring device. He whispered in a dead, hollow voice, "Balance requires precise observation." He didn't react as expected in the first stage, so we had to move to stage 2 of the dismantling. He jabbed a needle into my neck, and my body stiffened completely while he started taking notes on how my muscles were responding to the injection. To him, I wasn't human. I was just a complex machine whose mechanics he was trying to understand by manipulating my nerves. I woke up in a city police station. I don't even know how I got there. I told them everything, but the speakers looked at me with pity, thinking I was having a mental breakdown after the house collapse. While I sat there writing my statement, I noticed something on the officer's desk, the same laser device that sick engineer was carrying. My blood went cold. I looked at the officer. He was writing with a coldness I'd never seen before, and I noticed tiny surgical scars around his hairline. That's when the horrifying truth hit me. This isn't just one man. It's a whole system. They watch people who drift out of balance. Then they dismantle their lives piece by piece until they're reshaped or erased. I ran out of that station. I don't have a home, a car, or an identity anymore. I live in the shadows, moving through big cities where an engineer like that can't tear down a building without being noticed. But I see them everywhere. The electrician who stares a little too long on the street. The technician walking into the room next to mine at the hotel. The strangers watching me from their gray cars. Today, writing this in a crowded cafe, I heard a light tap on my table. I looked up. It was him, sitting at the table across from me, adjusting his tools quietly. He didn't say a word. He just left a small piece of paper and walked away. It had a complex mathematical equation, and at the bottom, written in my own handwriting, it said, "You are now perfectly balanced." I looked around and suddenly realized everyone in the cafe, every person walking on the street, stopped moving and looked at me at the exact same moment, with absolute cold indifference. I heard clicking sounds coming from under the floor, from the walls, from the ceiling. They've started the final dismantling. I'm not the hero of this story. I'm just a piece of decor that's about to be discarded because I messed up the balance. And now, I can hear the wood of the floor groaning under my weight, as if reality itself is starting to collapse around me. Have you ever checked into a hotel, and the floor the elevator stops at just doesn't feel right? I was on a business trip in Pittsburgh, staying at this old place called the Grand Edward. It wasn't a creepy hotel, just one of those grand historic buildings that smells like old money and dust. But on my third night, I pressed the button for the 4th floor to head back to room 404. When the door slid open, the hallway was disturbingly long. The carpet wasn't the deep red from the lobby anymore. It was this faded, sickly gray. I started walking toward my room, but I couldn't find 404. There was only one door at the very end of the hall, marked with a strange, impossible symbol. Something that looked like an hourglass. I swiped my keycard and God, it actually opened. The room inside wasn't my hotel room. It was a massive library, shelves stretching all the way to the ceiling, packed with thousands of cassette tapes. In the center, there was just one old tape recorder. Driven by this sick curiosity, I hit play. I wasn't expecting what I heard. It was my own voice coming through that old machine, talking to the front desk clerk just 2 hours earlier. I heard myself asking, "Is there a 4th floor?" And the clerk's voice, dead and hollow, replying, "There is no 4th floor in this hotel, sir. You're on the 3rd floor." I slammed the recorder off, my heart pounding against my ribs, and ran to the door. But when I pushed it open, there was no hallway. I was standing on the roof of the hotel in the biting Pittsburgh cold, looking down at a city that looked like a lifeless miniature model. I spun around frantic, but there was no door. Just a smooth, solid concrete wall, like that room never existed at all. I scrambled back down to my real room on the 3rd floor using the fire escape, barely able to breathe. I told myself it was just exhaustion, a hallucination, but the next day things got wrong. Really wrong. Every time I was about to do something, I'd hear an echo of the action a second before it happened. If I was going to set my coffee cup down, I'd hear the clink on the table before my hand even moved. If I was about to sneeze, I'd hear someone from the empty room next door say, "Bless you," a second before I actually sneezed. The hotel was warping my reality, or maybe I was just slipping out of time itself. I tried to leave, but the front doors were locked tight. No guards, no staff, just doors that refused to budge. I finally forced my way into the management office. The clerk from the day before was standing there, staring at a blank wall, wearing the same uniform. Beside him were thousands of those cassette tapes, just like the ones in the fourth floor room. He turned toward me, and his face, it was a nightmare. He had no eyes. His face was just smooth skin covered by a piece of cloth, with that same hourglass symbol stitched onto it. He spoke with this singular, flat voice. "You aren't in a hotel? You're in a storage facility." I could barely get the words out. "Storage for what?" He answered. "Storage for the events that time doesn't want to forget, but doesn't want anyone to actually live." He shoved me, and I didn't fall on wood. I fell through the floor, like it was nothing but thin air. I woke up in room 404. Everything looked normal, but the image of that faceless clerk from the office still haunted me. I stepped into the hall. The carpet was gray again, and every single door bore the hourglass symbol. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I was just shouting into the void. I realized then that I wasn't living my life anymore. I wandered down the endless hallway and found rooms standing open. Inside each one, there was someone who looked exactly like me, performing the same loop. One tying his shoes, one reading a book, one screaming. We were all just copies, trapped in an endless time loop. Every time a cycle ends, it gets recorded onto a tape and shelved on the fourth floor. I sat on the floor waiting for my own tape to start spinning again. And then, I heard it. A teenager walking into the lobby downstairs, asking the clerk for a room. Asking, "Is there a fourth floor?" I closed my eyes, knowing exactly what the clerk would say next. "There is no fourth floor." I'm back at the start of the tape. I'm living the moment I decided to walk into this hotel, but this time I know I'm never getting out. If you ever visit Pittsburgh and stay in an old hotel, never ever ask about floors you don't see on the elevator. Because if you do, you'll just become another number on a cassette tape, playing in an empty room. Forever. I used to work at a high-end hotel in downtown Seattle, handling logistics for conferences and weddings. We had this massive wedding event coming up, and the whole staff was just exhausted working around the clock. That day, a huge shipment of equipment arrived, and my manager ordered me to set up the tables in Hall B, following this really precise, strange blueprint from an outside event planning company. The layout was odd. The tables weren't arranged for socializing. They were set up like a maze, so you couldn't see anyone on the other side of the room. While I was setting up, I noticed these crates placed under the tables. I thought they were audio gear or extra decorations, but when my coworker tried to open one, my manager stopped him violently. He claimed they were sensitive sensors for the sound system. That's when the knot in my stomach started. The room wasn't prepped for guests, it was prepped to monitor them. At 7 sharp, the guests started arriving. They were all men, in dark suits, no women, no children. They didn't walk in like wedding guests, they marched in like they were following military orders. The manager stood at the door with a list, and anyone who didn't have a specific ID badge was turned away and taken to a side room, where I'd hear heated arguments, followed by an eerie, dead silence. In the middle of the event, the Wi-Fi and cell service inside the hall just dropped. It wasn't a glitch, it was jammed. I stepped out to call for help, but I found that all the staff members I'd been working with that day had vanished. In their place were men in black vests, guarding every single emergency exit. I realized then that I'd walked into a trap. This wasn't a wedding. It was a meeting for something else. And I was the only witness who wasn't supposed to be there. I tried to slip through the kitchen, but every landline phone had been ripped out of the walls. The air in that hall was suffocating. The men inside were talking in these quiet, terrifying whispers, nobody raising their voices. The manager was moving between the tables, placing small devices on each one. I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to burst into the hall and confront him. As soon as I walked in, everyone stopped talking. At the exact same time, they just stared at me with these hollow, empty eyes. The manager walked toward me, calm, and put a hand on my shoulder. He whispered, "You made an administrative error, son. You should have checked the guest list before you started." He didn't threaten me. He didn't pull a weapon, but the way those men looked at me, I knew if I tried to move, I wasn't making it out of there alive. I used my knowledge of the hotel's layout, every back door and service hallway, to get out. I pretended to give up, then slipped into the kitchen and made a run for a delivery truck that was idling outside. I jumped into the back and hid behind the crates. That truck drove for hours before finally stopping at some remote warehouse. I crept out, found the truck empty except for the wedding files. I opened them, and the truth hit me like a ton of bricks. It wasn't a wedding, it was a corporate hit, an administrative liquidation of people involved in some shadow deals. The hotel was just a cover. They'd lure the targets in, hold them, and interrogate them. I went to the police the next day, but when we went back to the hotel, it was business as usual. The hall was empty, and there wasn't a single trace of what I'd seen. But the real shock came when the hotel provided their report. No wedding was scheduled that day, and no employee by your name was ever in our records. They told me I'd worked at a completely different hotel. They'd wiped my identity, they'd forged my records. And now? Now I'm being hunted. I can't go back to my life. I can't prove who I am, because they have the power to rewrite history and ruin anyone who stands in their way. I'm writing this from somewhere off the grid, and I need you to listen. Not every wedding you see is a happy celebration. Sometimes it's just a way to make people disappear, and the place where you work might not even be the place you think it is.